So hello and welcome to You Are My Boro. And after what seems like weeks and weeks and weeks of counting down, we are finally here. The season starts tomorrow. Middlesbrough Millwall at the Riverside. And after all the talking, all of what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, Dom, we've made it. We've been to Chesterfield. We've been to Bradford. We've been to goodness knows where else. And we're finally here. Are you excited to actually get into it now?
Yeah, I am. It feels weird, doesn't it? Because, like, in some senses, like you say, it does feel like it's been a long time in waiting, and then in other senses, it feels like 2 minutes ago that Gustavo Hamer was wheeling away to the other side, and there's that anticipation. I mean, around the country, and there's always kind of that anticipation and optimism and excitement ahead of the new season. What are your standout before we start? What are your standout for opening day memories, and what are the best games you? Because the reason I got thinking about that was, remember Boro's late show at Millwall a couple of years ago when George Friend, Tony Pulis, George Friend scored a
I do
last minute goal. Yeah,
yes, I do, and that probably is one of the standouts. To be fair, opening games. I have in mind. I seem to always remember it being hot, which it's not going to be tomorrow, is it? That's the first thing. It's not going to feel like an opening day shivering in the Riverside rain. But yeah, in terms of what would be yours straight off the block?
I remember. Was it Birmingham when Karanka's first full season when they won 2-0, and I think Kike and Lee Tomlin might have scored, and Kike looked $1 million. And I remember, I think Lee Clark was Birmingham manager, and he came in afterwards and was kind of saying, they're a serious team, because it was a bit of an unknown quantity, really, Boro, weren't they, that year with Karanka's first full season. That one stands out. And then was it Ipswich? Was Strachan when they were kind of expected the big spending Strachan summer when they were expected to be up there, and it was an absolute damp squib. Was it Ipswich or was it Leicester? I think it was Ipswich who came and won at the Riverside on the first day. That one stands out for other reasons.
The first game of the Premier League season was Stoke, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Stoke 1-1, and it was one of them where you didn't really know whether that was any good or not, but in the pit of your stomach, you probably felt that it wasn't, and it wasn't.
Yeah, but it was a game you should have won. Boro weren't they? I remember that game.
They were 1-0 up,
Shaqiri equalised late on, or they equalised
certainly late on in the second half. Yeah, maybe 70, 80 kind of minutes. If memory serves me right. Not Boro, but I do remember a Sunderland first game that I covered against West Brom where Lee Cattermole must have scored from 35 yards at the Hawthorns. Now that's a collector's item, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was 2-2. Yeah. It was bacon hot, and Cattermole just absolutely spanked one in from at least 30 yards. I don't think he scored again for about 2 years.
The one going back years and years, when I was a kid, I think it was Southgate's Boro who beat Tottenham 2-0 on the opening.
Yeah.
Again, I'd have to check these. We should have checked this, shouldn't we? But I remember that being like walking away from that thing. Boro look $1 million this year, and then we all know what happened next, because I'm sure that was the year Boro went down. I'm sure it started well. But anyway, what will this?
Well, memory lane, things we kind of half remember but have probably got factually wrong. So that's a good one straight away. Get in the comments. Tell us we're absolutely
as you need to go on.
Exactly. Yeah. There's nothing like a good video or pod, is there, when you just straight away getting everything wrong. And speaking of getting everything wrong, we are going to do some championship predictions later on, which will inevitably be completely wrong. But we're going to, so we'll have a talk about, obviously, the Boro game this weekend, how we think they'll line up, what the main issues are around that. And then, as I say, we will broaden it out to a bit more of a general chat about who we fancy to go up, who might be top scorer in the championship, who might go down. So if you're going to have a little flutter this weekend before the action starts, then I'd definitely recommend steering away from whatever you hear from me and Tom in the next 20 minutes, half an hour. Right, Millwall this weekend. So you were at Michael Carrick's press conference, yesterday? Yeah. We all know he's not going to give an awful lot away in terms of team selection and everything. Let's go with lineup first. And we were just chatting off air. We do have a little bit of a chat off air. I wouldn't call it preparation, but we have a little bit of a chat. And you were saying your big prediction ahead of tomorrow is a bit of a surprise at left back.
I might be wrong on this, but I have a feeling he'll go with McGree at left back after experimenting with it in the second half against Auxerre and starting Silvera on the left flank. I might be wrong. He might go with Coulson. Coulson's probably the safer choice, isn't he? He is a left back. But yeah, I just have a feeling after that kind of experiment that he will go with that. He said, Carrick said after the Auxerre game that Coulson had also had a slight knock, but said that he planned to do it regardless. Anyway, yesterday he said that Coulson's fine. So if Coulson starts, then it'll be McGree on the left side of midfield, won't it? Yeah. But if not, if he does put McGree back there, then you suspect it'll be Silvera on the left flank. And really, unless there's any real curveball fitness surprises that one of the players who's been out comes back in and starts, which I think is incredibly unlikely. I think that's probably the only real position that's
the team largely picks itself, don't you? Once you accept that it's going to be McNair at right back, so he's not in the equation for centre half, then really, as things stand, like you say, unless someone's going to be fit that we're really not expecting, pretty much the rest of that team picks itself. That left back slot is really the only one that's any kind of choice for him, isn't it?
There's been suggestions this week that Coulson and Coburn and Howson are both back in light training. They were back in light training, but Carrick was kind of keen to stress really that you've got to be smart. Players are back in training, but he's not going to rush them back in. You can completely see that. Howson, Coburn, Akpom, they haven't played a minute in pre-season. And given that, the squad looks thin in certain areas, but Boro aren't, desperately going to rush Johnny Howson back when they've got Hackney and Barlaser in there, and they're not going to rush Josh Coburn back, considering he's, really in the whole scheme of things hardly played any first team games for Boro, and he hasn't featured at all in pre-season. So yeah, I'd be surprised if there's any late curveballs in terms of the team selection. And then I guess the thing is, how different is that team that starts tomorrow going to be to the team that starts, mid-September when everyone's back injured and Boro finished the window, finished the business?
Well, I mean, okay, so on that, if Michael Carrick gets everything that he wants between now and the start of September, who doesn't start in that team? Rodgers, presumably, because you'd bring in a new striker. McGree at left back, because you'd bring in your new left back, so then McGree probably moves to left wing. Akpom, ideally, you want back for Crooks, obviously, fitness-wise, and Howson probably for Barlaser. Is that Boro's best team in terms of if everyone's available? And they make the signings we think they might make?
Yeah, I think so. And probably Smith. I mean, you argue Dykesdale, but I think Carrick would say Smith, wouldn't he, at right back ahead of McNair. A centre forward. What would be kind of interesting, really, is we don't know, where does Carrick see Rodgers playing long term? Because he's kind of had to use him as a striker, hasn't he? Because his lack of options up there, really. But even if a striker comes in and Rodgers then shifts to, say, the flanks, then he's got a job on his hands to dislodge Force or McGree, hasn't he? And you've got Isaiah Jones there as well, who the hope is that Jones is going to get back to something like his best form this season. Obviously, he talked about the difficulties he had off the pitch last season. So, for as much as being made about, obviously, Boro need a couple of strikers and a left back. Getting those players back fit who've been out injured is of equal importance, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, especially when one of them's Akpom, who, so much of what Middlesbrough did, certainly in the second half of last season, was just built around how fantastic Akpom was playing. I mean, let's just touch on Rodgers very briefly then. We think he's going to lead the line tomorrow. I mean, we all know that, he himself admitted in an interview we did with him, didn't he, after one of the games I did with him in the tunnel, that he's kind of learning on the job. He's not played as a number 9 that much. Having said that, though, what an opportunity for him. I mean, if he goes and hits the ground running, then yes, Boro are still going to be desperate to bring in strikers, but this is a chance for him. I mean, Hayden Hackney came in from nowhere last season and turned himself into one of the best midfielders in the league. Now, we're not saying Rodgers is necessarily going to do that, but it's a massive chance for him, isn't it? This is what he's been screaming out for.
It is. And I was at Rotherham, and in the first half at Rotherham, yes, he missed chances. He could have had a hat-trick, but I thought he was excellent there. His movement, Rotherham had no answers really, and his link-up play. And he didn't look there like, I know he missed chances, but he didn't look like a winger playing as a striker. He looked comfortable there.
I mean, he missed a great chance in the early stages of the Betis game added at Chesterfield, kind of went clean through. Didn't do an awful lot wrong, just shot into the keeper's legs. Now, if he can get one of them in the back of the net in the first 10, 15 minutes on Saturday and really get the ball rolling, you just don't know, do you?
And the thing with Rodgers is, this is a lad who Manchester City paid God knows how much to sign from West Brom when he was, 16, 17. There's clearly an awful lot of talent there. And we asked Carrick about him last week after the Auxerre game, about what he'd said to you about, his finishing might need a bit of work. And Carrick is probably at his best speaking to the press, isn't he? When he maybe is in defence of his players. I remember last year a few times when he was asked about Zach Steffen, for example, and he was great, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Defending Steffen. And he pounced on it and said he's a good finisher. Morgan's a good finisher. He may be adapting to a slightly different role, but Carrick, I mean, I know he's not going to say anything otherwise, obviously, but like we said on the pod earlier this week, it's interesting, really, given that Crooks played up front for the most of the second half of the season, that he's playing Crooks as a 10 and Rodgers as a striker. He clearly sees something there.
Is there any worry then that he's going to be pitched in against Millwall? And there's a lot of cliches in football, but generally with Millwall, they ring true. I think we all know what Millwall are going to be. Yes, I think attacking-wise, they've made some interesting signings this summer. I'm looking forward to seeing how Kevin Nisbet slips in there, who's banged in goals in the Scottish Premier League, and Sunderland were looking at for a long, long time. And they've been a bit more interesting in the last 12 months in terms of bringing in attacking players from overseas. Obviously, both domestically and overseas, Zion Fleming being the standout example. But I think defensively, we know what Millwall are. They're big, they're strong, flat back four, two big centre-halves, full-backs that don't necessarily want to bomb forward and will tuck in and defend when they have to and make it really tight. Is that a big ask for a young lad like Rodgers who hasn't got a lot of experience as a number 9? It
probably is, but I think the beauty you've got there is if it was that front four or something like that front four we expect there, it's a very easy switch to put Crooks up there, isn't it? If after 10, 15 minutes you think we're maybe lacking a bit of physicality here. And the other thing I think is we saw last year, didn't we, that Boro's front four, whoever plays there, is so fluid. It kind of whoever plays as the striker isn't necessarily kind of the old-fashioned number 9 target man, are they? You see the four interchanging. So I think Boro and Carrick will kind of focus on their strengths rather than maybe worrying about going like for like or matching up against Millwall. But it is an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because like you say, I know it's the easy thing to say, but you do know what you're going to get from Millwall, don't you? They play to the strengths. And I do think it's an interesting challenge. I mean, obviously, Akpom has been a talk of this week as we got the chance to speak to Akpom at the EFL launch event this week, and he said that he's back in light training. Obviously, didn't put a timescale on things. So the hope is, I know there's obviously the uncertainty over his future, and Akpom said this week he'd love to stay, and then Carrick said on Thursday he's kind of remains relaxed about the situation. While the uncertainty rumbles away in the background, the hope is that Akpom makes progress in the next couple of weeks and would hopefully be fit to play. If he's still a Boro player at the end of the transfer window, the Akpom would be fit to play sooner rather than later, really.
Yeah, because as you say, Crooks as a 10, you've got the beauty of him being able to push up front. But what you haven't got is the link play and the dynamism that Akpom was bringing last season. It's clearly not a long-term fix, is it?
No, I mean, although Crooks was keen to point out last week, and we we had a couple of messages, didn't we, saying that we're on the back of a line of Michael Carrick saying that he's backing Morgan Rogers as a number 9, and then the next day we had the story with Crooks saying he's comfortable at number 10.
Yeah.
I had a couple of messages, tweets saying we're pushing an agenda. There's never anything of the sort, is there? It's just kind of the natural news line. If you speak to Matt Crooks after the game last week, is to ask him about playing at number 10.
How he feels about it, yeah,
because it's not a role he's played in too much for Boro. But Crooks was saying, last year, I remember Crooks saying that when Carrick told him he was playing up front, he said to him he'd only played there once, was it for Accrington early in his career, and he maybe didn't back himself, where Crooks was saying last week, he's played number 10 for Rotherham, he's comfortable playing there, and Carrick is working closely with him on the training ground, which, there was nothing in that to suggest that this was a stopgap. Now, obviously, if Chuba's fit, Chuba plays.
Yeah.
But perhaps this year, whereas when Crooks was used, be it as kind of a starter if Carrick was tinkering or as a substitute. Last season, he was coming on as a striker, wasn't he? You wonder this year whether he might be used more as a number 10. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
So before we get to the wider season stuff, what are you thinking? What do you think for tomorrow? What would be your gut feeling on Boro tomorrow?
I think Boro, for all the obviously focus is on what Boro still want to do in the window. I still think that team at a packed out Riverside will have enough to beat Millwall, and I fancy Boro to get off to a winning start. I think 2-0. What about you? You're there tomorrow. What's your?
Yeah, I'm there tomorrow. We'll get on to this. I've got Millwall to finish in the top 6 this year. I think they're always underplayed. I think they're actually developing into a better side than the cliched Millwall. I think this is a test for Boro tomorrow. I think that Boro will create enough chances to score, but I think it'll be a tight game. I'm going to go 1-1.
And I don't think a draw's a bad result.
It depends a little bit on how they play, doesn't it? But
yeah,
I agree, because I think Millwall are a good side, and I think that they're probably going to be more like the Millwall of last season than Boro at the moment are going to be like the Boro of last season, if that makes sense. And that, Millwall, they only missed, how they missed out on the playoffs on the last day of the season is still a miracle, isn't it, really, Millwall? So, no, I kind of agree. I think as long as the performance level is there, then a draw is certainly not a disaster, given that we all know that there are 3 or 4 key players, whether they're already at the club injured or coming in, hopefully, by the end of the transfer window, that are going to improve this Boro side.
And I think there is a thing as well, like maybe not giving Millwall the credit they deserve, because last year, that draw at home to West Brom on the first day of the season, I thought that's a decent point for Boro. And if Boro were playing, say, Norwich at home tomorrow, or Watford or Coventry, who finished in the playoffs last year, and drew, then you'd probably say, a draw at home to a playoff contender. And Millwall have been in the mix now for the last 2, 3, 4 seasons. Yeah. And like you say, you'd expect to be in a game. Obviously, you want to get off to a winning start at home, but like you say, as long as there's a decent performance there, I don't think a draw's a disaster by any means on the opening day. There is an element, isn't there, for Boro and every championship club, of just getting through this first month before the window closes, before you have your squad completely in shape. In some cases, it's almost like limiting the damage, really, isn't it?
Well, we could do an entire vid on this, couldn't we? The kind of ridiculousness of playing these games while the transfer window still got so far to go. And that, the teams, every team is going to look different come September the 1st. It just will. But anyway, that, as I say, that is a whole new thing. But yeah, I think you're right, especially when, like Boro, there are key elements still to come in this transfer window. Then it's just important, like you say, to get through these first 2 or 3 games, get enough points on the board so that you're right in amongst it, and almost just get the ball rolling while knowing that it's not really where you're at. So, okay, so the season as a whole then, we've done kind of bits and bobs of championship previews and that. I mean, how do you think this championship is shaping up? How do you think it looks?
On paper, it looks brutal, doesn't it?
That's what I was kind of going to get to, really.
Yeah. Southampton, Leeds, Leicester. I fancy Ipswich coming up through League One. I think Ipswich look good. We'll get to predictions. I think Ipswich will finish in the top 6. And then you've got like the great disappointments of last season, like Norwich and Watford, I mean, who the hell knows what to expect of Watford, but
Yeah.
you'd still expect them probably to be in and amongst it. West Brom, Coventry, Sunderland, you could go on and on. I mean, the Championship's like no other league in that out of 24 teams, how many do you realistically think are starting the season with playoff and promotion ambitions? I bet you could make a case for 16, 17, easy.
Certainly more than half.
Yeah. I think Southampton looks strong, and I think Russell Martin's a shrewd appointment there. Although I was listening to another preview this week, and they were saying that for all Martin's done a solid job at other clubs, challenging at the top end and dealing with that expectation of a team that's expecting to win is maybe something new for him. But I mean, players are going to go, aren't they? But even if the likes of Lavia and obviously Livramento, Ward-Prowse, whoever else, they're still going to be left with a good squad. I fancy Southampton. Leicester, it's the kind of unknown of Maresca, really, isn't it? And how he deals with it. And I guess the culture shock of the Championship for a team that won the Premier League not so long ago. And I do think Leeds are something of an unknown quantity as well of the teams coming down. What do you think?
I think that as it stands at the minute, all three of the relegated teams look ridiculously strong. And it's just a question of who and how many they lose between now and the end. So, for example, Leicester, if you look at the charts to be top scorer in the Championship, the bookmakers' odds, 3 of the first 4 are Leicester strikers. Jamie Vardy, Kelechi Iheanacho, Patson Daka.
Which I think Vardy's are ridiculous because he's not going to play. That's the easy.
Exactly. And it's inconceivable that Leicester will have those 3 strikers come September the 1st. But if they were to have 2 of them, Vardy plus Iheanacho or Daka, then between the 2 of those, however many they play, however they dovetail, you could see the 2 of those scoring nigh on 40 goals. So straight away, that would make me... I take on board that Maresca's a bit of an unknown quantity. Obviously, stepping out of an assistant role. Winks and Cody coming in. There's a lot of upheavals. They've lost a lot of big names. There's a lot still to go on. But I just think that if they can keep 2 of their 3 strikers, then with players like James Justin coming back from injury, I think they will be really strong. Southampton are broadly similar in that Shea Adams and Adam Armstrong, if they're going to play up front all season for Southampton, I don't see a scenario where they don't score goals because the Championship looks their level. Southampton are interesting in that they've got quite a lot of young players who never really got much of a chance in the Premier League. And so we don't really know how good they are. And then there's the unknown of the manager there. And then Leeds, again, how many of their players they're going to hold on to. Non-tour, you would imagine, will go. They've already lost quite a few. But, they've got players like Rutter, who didn't really get a look in the second half of the season, but has scored goals in the Bundesliga. And they paid £20 million for. And, a load of clubs in Europe want them. Now, if he is anything like what they thought he was, then he should be a real force at the Championship. So, for all that there's the uncertainty, for all that there's the upheaval, I find it hard to take any of those 3 out of the top 6 come the end of the season. And then it just becomes a massive bun fight because, as you say, there's an awful lot of clubs who underperformed last season and will feel they need to do it this year. Norwich, West Brom, Watford, probably Stoke. And then you've got Boro and Sunderland, who are obviously in the playoffs. Coventry, Millwall, who I think will be underestimated and are being underestimated. But I see no reason, like I say, why Millwall won't be there or thereabouts again. Because if anything, I think their squad now is a little bit stronger and they should have been in the playoffs last year. And then, yes, Coventry have lost Gyökeres, but I like the Ellis Sims signing. And I think if they can hold on to players like Hamer and Godden, then I think they'll be right up there as well. And then, like you say, you've got Ipswich. So I think it's a better, stronger Championship than it was last year. And so I think it will be that much tougher to get into the top 6. Now, I think Borough have a great chance of doing it. Clearly, we're going to say that that a lot's going to depend on what happens between now and the end of the month, as we keep on repeatedly saying. But I think it's a tougher league this year. And I struggle to get any of the 3 relegated clubs at the moment out of that top 6. You?
In our predictions, we've both got Boro finishing in the top 6, haven't we?
Yes.
I think I've got Boro finishing 3rd, maybe you
I have
4th. 4th, yeah. I think I had Southampton, Leicester, Boro, Leeds, or Boro, Ipswich. Maybe. Like I say, I'm properly banging this Ipswich drum.
Yeah.
And I fancy Sunderland. I know there's really serious question marks there, given that they still need a striker, and obviously Ross Stewart, the uncertainty, and Jack Clark, who's wanted by Burnley. But I don't know. I think, they've got a kind of young, exciting team. I like the look of Bellingham. I know he's only 17. Chris Riggs, 16. But obviously, the challenge for Sunderland this year is I guess, twofold. A, dealing with expectation, and B, it does look like a stronger league. And I think the other thing is that there will inevitably be a team that you don't expect to be in there, like Sunderland last year, like Luton the year before.
Yeah.
There's countless examples, isn't there, over recent seasons, and there will be one of those teams. At the other end, I mean, I know this hopefully will have no bearing whatsoever on Boro, but my 3 to go down, I think I think Rotherham might come up a bit short this year. I think Cardiff, it could be a long, hard season for Cardiff. And Sheffield Wednesday, I'm not sure about getting rid of Darren Moore on the back of promotion. I think they're the 3 I'm going to go for: Rotherham, Cardiff, and Sheff Wed to go down.
I would have Sheff Wed. They'd be my favourites. I think that club has just kind of eaten itself since they won the playoff 3. I mean, goodness me, they only just scraped through that, didn't they? And then, like you say, the Darren Moore thing. Chansiri clearly thinks he knows how to run a football club and wants to do everything himself. I think that they're in a mess. The other club who I think are in a monumental mess are QPR. Now, Chair and Willock, give them a chance because they're 2 very good players. They always seem to play well against Boro, both of them. But beyond that, there really is nothing. They haven't signed anyone. They've got no money. Fernandez seems to want out. Gareth Ainsworth came in last year, didn't really have the impact that he probably hoped for, and people might. So I would have QPR in there. I see the Cardiff thing. I think they're in a similar situation where money's clearly tight. They haven't really been able to resolve everything off the pitch. So I'd go with that. I'd go Sheff Wed, QPR, Cardiff. With the caveat, he is one to throw in. I always think that if you're having a bet in relegation markets in the Championship, you're always vulnerable to a team who, off the pitch, implode and end up having points taken off or lose players and everything like that. More than any other league, teams that have overspent and overpushed and all of a sudden the rug's pulled out with them distort that market. And little whispers, things you hear, I think Blackburn could be a team who end up in trouble this season. Doesn't sound like it's right off the pitch. There was suggestions at various stages this summer that Thomason was going to walk away because he wasn't really getting what he wanted. Obviously, Brereton's gone. Dak's gone. Admittedly, didn't play a lot last season, but I think he's still a big player there. Doesn't look to me like they've really been able to replace them or strengthen. I just wonder if Blackburn might be the real surprise in the relegation argument. And
they were funny last year, weren't they? Because they were spent the vast majority of the season in the top 6, and yet it always felt inevitable that they
never played very well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I remember when Boro won there. Whenever it was it the kind of turn of the year, just after not long after the World Cup break? And talking to a few guys down there, and they were kind of saying that they kind of didn't really know how they were hanging around at the top end like they were. And I think the other great unknown of every Championship season is what on earth Stoke are going to do. Yeah, because you look at that, they had, in fact, when they drew at Boro, didn't they? Last year, back into the season, and they were as good as any team I saw.
It's been really well,
And at that stage, you thought that they're getting some momentum now. I mean, there was even talk at one point of, is it possible for them to sneak in through the back door? And then the form fell off a cliff again at the end of last season, and it leaves you kind of wondering again, what what the hell are they going to look like this year? I mean, I like Neil as a manager. I think he's a really good manager, but you couldn't put any big money on Stoke one way or another this season, would you?
No, you couldn't. No, you couldn't. No. For that reason that, they seem to be stuck in that Netherland of having invested massively heavily, spent the parachute payments, and then had to start taking a lot out, and you're rebuilding, but with a really unbalanced squad. That's always been my view of Stoke, that it never really hangs together, and I'm not sure it will at the minute. I think one team who will do better than people think, so if you were to say, like you get those handicap markets where teams are kind of... I think Birmingham will do better than people think, because I think that they're a team who actually now all of a sudden have had a little bit of positivity off the pitch. They've been a basket case for 10 years, but it seems like it's stabilising a little bit there. And I actually quite like some of the signings they've made. I think they'll be better. I don't think they'll be involved in the relegation battle, put it like that. I'm not saying that they'll challenge for the playoffs, but I think they'll be comfortably mid-table, which they haven't been for a while.
I think Plymouth are that team. I think, again, 21st would be a good season for Plymouth, wasn't it? But I think Plymouth will come up knowing what they are. They won't try and outreach themselves, will they? It'll be kind of, the one promotion really on good coaching from Stephen Schumacher and playing the strengths as a club, and I think they'll do that. You look at them, and you would think they'll approach the Championship like Rotherham have, for example, where if they go back down, then they'd go back down having built on a season in the Championship. Obviously, their aim is to stay up, but I don't think they'll stretch beyond their means this summer, and I think they'll kind of 17th, 18th, which would be a good season for them. What do you think of Warnock's Huddersfield?
Yeah,
I mean, they couldn't get themselves in the mix, could they?
No, surely not. Surely not. I think as long as Warnock's there for the whole season, they'll stay up.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
The only reason that I say that is, and I don't think his job will be under pressure, but Warnock being Warnock, you just never know if at any stage he's going to decide, you know what, actually, I've had enough.
I don't need this.
Yeah, especially if they are scrapping down there. But now I see Huddersfield being bottom half, but not really ever properly embroiled in the relegation fight. I think, as I say, as long as Warnock's there, I think he'll keep their heads well above water.
We're not far off predicting our 1 to 24.
We're not. What about
just on Boro then? Just on Boro before we wrap up. What are you feeling on kind of key players? Who do they need to keep fit? Top scorer, player of the season. What are you?
Well, so there's a few things here, isn't there? Akpom is an obvious starting point. Assuming he stays, and for all that. There's been growing rumours of Sheffield United potentially being interested this week. Let's work on the assumption that he stays. Then he still looks like being Boro's pivotal attacking player. And even if they bring in a new number 9, assuming that Chuba stays in that number 10 role, he's going to be massively important to how Boro play. I'm not necessarily saying he's got to score the number of goals like he did last season, because I think that was a little bit of a freak in that, I wouldn't be piling money onto Chuba Akpom to be top scorer again. But I think that if Boro are going to have a good season, then if he's playing in that number 10 role every week, he's going to have another good season. I think player of the season might end up being Hayden Hackney, because I think that he is developing at that kind of rate of knots. Now, there's expectation on him now, and that's going to be interesting. Certainly in the first half of last season when he came in, he got a free hit. To a degree, he got a little, yes, pressure and expectation was starting to increase in the second half of last season, but he was still the young kid who was finding his way in the first team. He's not anymore. He's one of the most highly rated central midfielders in the Championship. And I think that, if he continues to develop as he has been, then this could be an absolutely massive season for him. And then the other one I would throw in there that I think will be really important is Dieng, because Stefan's obviously gone. Dieng's come in. He's going to be a massive part of how Michael Carrick wants Boro to play out from the back. He's going to be really important in terms of starting attacks and being that sweeper keeper. But then he's also going to have to make important saves. And for all that Stefan had an occasional wobble, I thought in the second half of last season, he did make some really important saves, and I think Dieng will have to do that probably again if Boro are going to do it. So there's a bit of a cop-out, but I've given you 3 there. What do you think?
John, I agree on Hackney, and on that whole kind of second season syndrome. We spoke to him this week at the EFL launch, and there's a feature interview in the Echo on Saturday and online first thing on Saturday morning. And just kind of speaking to him off the pitch, you don't get the impression that he's fazed by kind of the pressure or the weight of expectation or whatever, but B, that he'd ever get too big for his boots.
Yeah.
You know, kind of as modest as ever, really, and talking about how this time last year he was expecting to go out on loan. His best hope was probably a few cup games and then to go out on loan. And it was put to him that, you know, at the start of the summer there was maybe a bit of Premier League interest, and did he get his head turned at all? And he completely dismissed it as though, like, you know, why on earth would I want to play for anyone other than my hometown club?
Which is great, isn't it?
Yeah, so I agree on that. I think a couple of others. I think it's a big season for Fry because the early signs under Carrick were really promising, and then obviously he got sent off against Sunderland, and his season was stop-start from there. But I think this is the season where Fry can really kind of show himself to be one of the best centre-halves in the division again. And I also think Marcus Forss has got a big role to play because when Ramsey came in at the end of last season, Ramsey was one of the first. You felt like the first choice, if everyone was fit, was probably Ramsey, Akpom, and McGree playing behind. Whereas as things stand, Forss looks pretty nailed on. And what did he score last year? 10 goals.
Yeah.
Considering he spent the start of the season not in Chris Wilder's plans. Then he had to adapt to moving from centre forward to the right. Then he was kind of in and out because of the options Carrick had. So I think Forss has got a real chance to start the season in the team and to nail down his place, really. And to because I probably don't think he got the credit he deserved for what was a really impressive.
No, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Well, there's 6. Clearly, the new strike is going to be 7. Left back, whoever comes in at left back's going to be important. There's
Darrell Lenihan, the leader. There's
Well, listen, we hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you keep enjoying these chats. Thanks so much for supporting us. Please, if you're watching it on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment. If you're listening to it on one of the pods, then spread the word and subscribe in whichever way you do so. We'll be back on Monday when we'll be picking the bones through Boro's opening game against Millwall. Hopefully, you're right, Dom. I'm being unduly negative and we're celebrating a great win. 3 points on the board, everything rosy. And obviously, we'll have a cup game to look forward to as well because we're straight into that on Tuesday, aren't we? So, loads to talk about. But for now, enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the game if you're off to the Riverside. Pop up the press box and say hello if you are. And join us next week for more You Are My Boro.